Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our discussion. Today, we're delving into a question that continues to spark considerable debate. Is feminism still relevant in the 21st century? It's a topic that touches upon our societal structures, personal experiences, and future aspirations. Joining us are Sarah, a passionate advocate for contemporary feminist perspectives, and Ben, who brings a more critical viewpoint, questioning some aspects of modern feminism. We aim for a thoughtful and respectful exchange of ideas, appropriate for our B2 level audience, to explore the nuances of this complex issue. Let's begin with opening statements. Sarah, would you like to start?
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everyone. When we discuss feminism, it's crucial to understand it as the ongoing pursuit of genuine gender equality, social, economic, and political. It is not about female superiority, but about dismantling systemic barriers that prevent any gender from reaching their full potential. In my view, feminism is not only still relevant, but profoundly necessary in the 21st century. This necessity stems from the fact that, despite significant progress for which we are all grateful, many critical issues persist, impacting lives daily. Let's consider economic disparities, for instance. The gender pay gap, a persistent discrepancy in earnings, remains a tangible reality in many professions and across numerous countries. This gap often widens further when we examine the experiences of women of color or those from other marginalized communities, highlighting layers of inequality. Then there's the glass ceiling, a concept that, though perhaps more subtle now than in past decades, still demonstrably limits the advancement of qualified women into top leadership positions. This applies to both the corporate world and the political sphere, where decisions shaping our societies are made. We consistently observe an underrepresentation of women in parliaments, on corporate boards, and in other key decision-making roles. This lack of representation has significant consequences for policy development, resource allocation, and the overall direction of societal development, often meaning that female perspectives are not adequately considered. Furthermore, societal pressures and the pervasive issue of gender-based violence continue to affect countless individuals, primarily women and girls, but also others. From the insidious nature of street harassment and online abuse to the devastating reality of domestic violence, these are not merely isolated incidents. Instead, they are indicators of deeper, systemic problems related to power imbalances and harmful gender norms that feminism actively seeks to identify, challenge, and ultimately eradicate. It's also vital in contemporary feminist discourse to highlight the importance of intersectionality. Intersectionality is a framework that helps us understand how experiences of gender inequality are often compounded and interwoven with other social and political identities. These identities include race, class, sexual orientation, religion, and disability, among others. Effective feminist advocacy, therefore, must acknowledge these overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination to ensure that the movement truly champions equality for all, not just for a select, privileged few. The work of feminism is consequently far from complete. It continues to evolve, to adapt to new challenges, and remains absolutely essential for building a more just, equitable, and prosperous world for everyone. This requires ongoing dialogue, critical self-reflection within the movement itself, and persistent advocacy to challenge and change the entrenched status quo.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning, Sarah, everyone. I want to begin by unequivocally acknowledging the historical importance and the profound societal contributions of feminism. The early waves of feminism achieved monumental successes: women's suffrage, vastly increased access to education, and the establishment of fundamental legal rights for women. These were undeniably crucial paradigm shifts that have positively reshaped our societies, and from which we all continue to benefit. However, when we pose the question of whether feminism, particularly in its current diverse manifestations, is still relevant in many developed societies today, I believe the question warrants careful and nuanced scrutiny. A key consideration is whether many of the primary, tangible goals set out by earlier feminist movements have now been largely achieved, at least within the legal and structural frameworks of these developed nations. In numerous Western countries, for instance, women possess full legal equality with men. In certain educational domains, such as university enrollment and graduation rates, women now often outnumber men, which is a significant shift. My critique, therefore, often centers on some aspects of modern feminist discourse. At times, this discourse can appear divisive, or it might perhaps overstate certain problems in specific contexts, potentially leading to unintended consequences, such as fostering resentment or misunderstanding. There is a perceptible risk that some contemporary narratives might inadvertently foster a sense of antagonism between genders, rather than promoting the collaboration that is surely needed to address remaining societal issues. Furthermore, I observe a tendency within some prominent contemporary feminist discussions to focus quite intensely on issues that are particularly prevalent in Western, relatively affluent societies. While these issues are undoubtedly valid and important to those who experience them directly, this specific focus can sometimes overshadow or draw attention away from the far more severe and life-threatening gender inequalities faced by millions of women in other parts of the world. I'm referring to critical issues such as the denial of basic education, the horrors of forced marriage and child marriage, female genital mutilation, or extreme forms of gender-based violence that are endemic in some regions. Is it possible that the considerable intellectual and activist energy of what is broadly termed feminism could be more effectively, or perhaps more urgently, directed towards these pressing global crises? This is not to dismiss the experiences or challenges faced by women in developed nations, but rather to call for a degree of perspective and proportionality when we consider the global fight for genuine gender equality and human dignity. So while I hold deep respect for feminism's historical contributions and its ongoing fight against oppression where it is most stark, I believe it's legitimate to critically examine the current emphasis and specific approaches of some feminist movements today. And we should consider whether a broader, more universal human rights framework might sometimes be more unifying and ultimately more effective for tackling certain contemporary issues, especially in societies that have already undergone significant feminist-driven reforms.
Thank you both. Sarah, you highlight ongoing struggles. Ben, you suggest many foundational goals are met. Ben, considering issues like the persistent gender pay gap or reports on workplace harassment, do these not suggest a clear, continued role for feminism?
That's a fair question, Alex. I don't deny the existence of issues like the pay gap or workplace harassment. These are serious concerns. However, I question if they are always solely attributable to systemic sexism, as traditionally defined. The pay gap, for example, is complex. Factors like career choices, hours worked, and negotiation differences play a significant role. Are these choices entirely free? That's a deeper discussion, but it's not always a simple case of direct discrimination for the exact same role, which is illegal. Solutions for harassment might involve stricter policy enforcement and fostering respectful cultures for everyone, not necessarily just through a singular feminist lens. Perhaps specific, targeted policy changes or broader educational initiatives on respect, rather than broad feminist ideology, could be more universally effective for some of these persistent issues.
Ben, I understand your points, but I believe choices are often heavily influenced by societal structures and expectations that feminism aims to dismantle. For instance, the pressure on women to be primary caregivers or less assertive in salary negotiations isn't accidental. It's often a product of systemic gender conditioning. These societal norms perpetuate economic disparities and limit opportunities. Feminism provides the essential framework for understanding and challenging these root causes. Furthermore, while policy changes are crucial, it's often feminist advocacy that brings issues like harassment to the forefront and demands that action. It's about collective action and shifting the cultural landscape, not just isolated incidents or individual failings. We need that systemic perspective.
An interesting point about societal structures. Now, a common discussion point, and sometimes a criticism, is about the inclusivity of modern feminism and its impact. Sarah, how does feminism today ensure it's inclusive and addresses concerns that it might be perceived as anti-men?
That's a vital question. Feminism, especially intersectional feminism, fundamentally benefits everyone by challenging restrictive gender roles that harm all genders. For instance, it critiques toxic masculinity, the harmful pressures on men to suppress emotions or conform to narrow stereotypes, which is detrimental to their well-being. The core aim is equality and liberation from such constraints for all, not female supremacy or animosity towards men. It's about dismantling a patriarchal system, not attacking individuals. Efforts are constantly being made to amplify diverse voices within the movement, including women of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, and others, to ensure more representative and inclusive advocacy. The goal is to create a society where everyone can flourish, free from discrimination, and that message needs to be clearly and consistently communicated.
I acknowledge the ideal of inclusivity, Sarah, and agree that challenging harmful stereotypes for all genders is beneficial. However, in practice, some feminist rhetoric, especially in certain online spaces, can be perceived as alienating or generalizing towards men, rather than focusing on systemic critiques. This perceived hostility can create backlash and hinder constructive dialogue, potentially pushing away allies who support genuine equality but feel unfairly targeted. Also, while intersectionality is crucial, there are sometimes internal debates about which voices or issues are prioritized, leading to some feeling marginalized even within the movement. My concern is whether all expressions of feminism truly live up to these inclusive ideals, or if some inadvertently foster division instead of the intended unity around shared goals of equality.
While complexities and internal debates exist, reflecting an evolving movement, the journey to true gender equality is undeniably far from over. Significant disparities persist. Feminism, therefore, remains a vital framework for understanding and tackling these deep-rooted issues effectively. It calls for continued engagement and collective action to build a genuinely equitable future for all.
I also valued this discussion. Critical engagement with feminist ideas, including their application and potential consequences, remains essential for genuine progress. Focusing on universal human rights and individual responsibilities might, in some cases, offer a more unifying path to address specific inequalities effectively. Evolving our approaches to ensure broad collaboration and achieving fairness for all is certainly a worthwhile goal.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Ben, for your thoughtful contributions to this important discussion. Clearly, the relevance and nature of feminism are subjects of ongoing, significant debate. We thank our audience for joining us today.